Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the Behringer X-Touch and how you can connect that to vMix to control audio and a whole lot more. But before we get to that, I'd like to invite everyone, if you have anything you want to share with the group, please just post it in the comments below on whatever social platform you're watching on. And, we'd love to respond and have the engagement. So that's always appreciated. Also, if you'd like to join us live on air, we have a link in the show notes that, covers, pretty much what you have to do. Just click on that link and somebody from the studio will get you on with us here. So before we jump in the show, we have a number of people who've joined us here on the comment section already. So let me start. I believe I'm trying to go from the beginning. So Nathan Bennett has joined us. Nathan, thank you for joining us. I know it's probably pretty early. I believe you're from Australia, so it's pretty early. So thank you for taking the time on your Saturday to join us. We have Rudy with us. Rudy, as always, thank you for joining. We have Omega Radio and Television. So Omega, thank you for being part of the show here. Let's see. And we also have Cloud Bedrock, so from the Metro Detroit area. Oh, and we also have Stan Jones. So Cloud Bedrock, thank you. Stan Jones, thank you. And hello back to everyone. So let's get started. On last week's show, one of our viewers, Aziz, I believe it's Aziz the videographer, actually was asking some questions about activators and how that would work. And we talked a little bit about that as we were going into the post-show Hangout. And what we decided to do, since Aziz was nice enough to do a super chat donation, we figured on today's show, we wanted to cover a topic that would include both activators and some of the stuff we talked about with dynamic scripting. So we've combining those two elements in here, and we're going to do that in a way that integrates the X-Touch from Behringer into vMix. So the X-Touch, if you aren't familiar with it, it's basically an audio-centric control surface. It has 9 motorized faders here. So there are 8 that are really meant as your main source faders, and 1 master fader, and that's really the way it's set up, but you can map them to anything you want. There are sets of buttons that you can use, shuttle and play controls, all different types of buttons and gadgets here. And though the integration with vMix isn't really deep, what we wanted to be able to show was how you could actually use this as a control surface to run a full production. And this includes having the sliders, either if you make changes in audio in the vMix side, the motorized faders respond to that, or if you make changes on the motorized faders, vMix responds to that. So that's what we'll be covering on today's show. And the first place to start with that is really, how do you connect the X-Touch to vMix? Because it's not an absolutely straightforward process. It's different from sort of the Stream Deck, where you plug it in and you have your Stream Deck controller and it just runs. This is a bit different. So what I want to do is I want to take and try to show you this process from the ground up. And I'm actually going to shut the X-Touch off and we'll start from the beginning. So if I reach over here, the first thing you need to do when you set this up is to make sure that you're on hopefully the latest, but one of the later firmware upgrades to the X-Touch. And the way you can do this is, if you look at the surface here, there is a display button right here. So with this display button, if I press that and go around and turn on the unit, what you'll see is this is the version number of the firmware. And you need to be at least version 1.15, that we're at the latest version, which is 1.22. So we know that everything in terms of the firmware is up to date and will let us do what we want to connect. So the next thing you need to do is you have to set up what way this interface is going to connect with vMix. And so for us, we want to do it as a USB controller. And there are lots of different ways this unit can hook up. So the way you do that is you come over and you press on select in this first channel, reach over, turn it on. And what this will come up with, it'll give you the mode that you want to connect with, and it will give you the connection interface, the interface that you want to use to make that connection. So I don't know if we can zoom in any closer here, but in this first case, we have the control. And when you turn this knob here, it'll let you do all the different types for control modes. So what we want is mode is CTRL. So, okay, good. So that's the control mode that we want to be using. The connection that we want is actually going to be USB. So that IFC, that's the interface connection you're going to use. So you want that to be on USB. And when you have both of those set, you just press the select button again, and everything jumps back and connects. So that's the first thing. So this will get the unit physically connected to vMix. And now in vMix, we can make a few settings on the flip side to make sure all this is good. So the first setting, let me switch over to vMix here. We're going to go first into shortcuts. And over here under Midi settings and shortcuts, so we just went to the settings section, you have to make sure that this X-Touch controller shows up and is checked, because this is going to be one of the things you'll need to do to have this conversation with vMix. The next thing you'll need to do is you need to go into Activators. And in Activators, there'll be Enable Devices, and that's another button here. So you need to come in and make sure that, again, your X-Touch is enabled in Activators. And this is going to let us do a full back and forth connection with the X-Touch from vMix. So those are sort of the getting started basics. So let's talk a little bit more now about how you actually go in and start to do the mapping of the faders that we looked at with the audio controls inside of vMix. And the first place to focus on is understanding the difference between the shortcuts that are associated here and the activators. So what shortcuts will do is shortcuts will take an input from an external source and feed that into vMix. So vMix can respond to that. And we know this from the Stream Deck. I mean, we usually use the Stream Deck to trigger shortcuts. But there are multiple ways when we do shortcuts to actually do that trigger besides just a button press. And we'll get into that. The other piece, and you need both sides of this, so this is very important. The other piece to this is the activator side. What an activator is going to do, it's going to look at the status of something inside of vMix and give you a way to signal an external device to accommodate that status, to somehow display something or adjust something or change something against that status. But activators tend to deal specifically with hardware devices. And so this would be something where you could light up one of the button presses on a Stream Deck. These things, though, are decoupled. So I could set up the shortcuts without having corresponding activators or vice versa. So you end up having to make sure when you do this, if you want whatever control surface, whether you're doing it on screen in vMix or over on the X-Touch, you need to make sure that for those to be in sync, you have both an activator and a shortcut assigned for each one of the controls. So let's actually start on the shortcut side. So I'm going to go into vMix on the shortcuts, and I'm going to just take a look. So in shortcuts, there are multiple different things that you can end up doing. So what we want to do for most of these is going to be set volume. That's the shortcut we'll use. So inside of vMix, the set volume shortcut adjusts the volume level for a given input. So for each one of the inputs, you have that. So we'll start there. And so in this case, in our vMix setup, we have one host and 6 remote guests that are coming in. So those are just looping video, but it works for demo purposes here. So these are 7 inputs. So let's just take a look at what we have set up with for the first input. So what we're doing is, as opposed to a key press, which is what, if you've used the Stream Deck, that's probably what you're used to. As opposed to a key press, we're using something called a Midi control change. And so there's all different types of things you can respond to. So we want to respond to a Midi control change. And what we're doing is we want to find this key, the MIDI controller that's going to control this. And when we click on Find here, what we need to do is we need to drag the key here. And as you see, as I'm moving this key, it's recognizing it over here. So it doesn't matter where you click on it, because it's just looking for activity on that key. That now maps that slider to the set volume control. And because it's a MIDI control change, it's actually going to use the value in that slider. If you saw when I slid it up and down, you saw multiple values change in there. That's giving you the volume control. And that's what we've done. So in this case, let me sort of bounce out of here very quickly. So in this case now, you can see if I slide this up, you can see in vMix that the slider now is responding to that. And so that's the first piece. That's what that shortcut does with the MIDI control map to it. So that's the first piece in this setup. Now, we did this for inputs, but we also, in this case, let me jump back in here, we set it up for the master volume, almost identical to what we just did, except the control here is, the function here is set master volume instead of, just the regular set volume for an input. And we also did the same for the bus A. And the bus A is the audio level that we're returning to get. So this would be a logical control to have on your system. So this is it. And that's just set bus A volume, because we're using bus A for this. So that takes care really of how we're going to handle the activators here, the shortcuts here. So the next piece we're going to jump into is the activators. But before I do that, I want to jump back over to the comment section here. And let's see. So we have JP is wishing everybody good evening from South Africa. Hello, JP. Thank you. So Nathan is commenting that he's been struggling with MIDI activators. And so hopefully this will answer your questions. But let's, if we have anything that we don't cover here, we'll cover it in the post-show Hangout. So feel free to jump in and ask any questions that you want here. So, Battle for Freedom, he's saying greetings and smellutations. I'm assuming that that's salutations and some sort of spell checker. Thank you, Battle for Freedom. So we have Michael Quist. Michael, thank you for joining us again. Good to see you here. So we also have Bill Mew. So he's saying there is a great deal of interest from the recently announced Rodecaster Pro 2, which will have massive versatility. Yeah, so we don't have that here. Definitely very interested in that as a unit. It basically took all the things in the Rodecaster Pro first version, that initial version, and reworked it for the way people were actually using it. So I love when vendors do that. If we're able to get our hands on one of those, that's definitely something we'd like to do. He's also saying that would be a far more cost-effective solution than an X-Touch, which we agree. I mean, the X-Touches are about $500 to $600 US, based on, supply chain issues and everything else. So we do think it would be a much more versatile solution. This is what we had in-house already. So we figured this would, at least for demo purposes, cover the basics. But Bill, thank you. And if we can get that Rodecaster Pro 2, we'll definitely take a look at it here on the show. Okay, so now that we've covered the shortcuts piece of this. Let's go in and look a bit at what we have to do in activators. So activators are almost like a mirror to shortcuts, which is how they really function. So what I'm doing for activators is that I am taking an input, an event that happens on an input or inside the system, and I'm telling vMix to map that incident, that event that has happened to some sort of external representation. So let's look at this in terms of the audios that we have. And we'll jump in here for the first activator. And so this is for the audio level for the host. So it's just the first input we have. So we are doing a control change, which is there's a note, which would be, I want to change something on a particular key. And the other is a control change, which is saying this actually has some sort of value that's going to be associated with it. And we want to leverage that value. So like before, we do the same thing with the find, and it will find, the same sort of, when we do this, I move the slider here, same thing we did before. So, and that we just cancel out as we have this all set, but that's all we do. So we've mapped a control change to a slider. And then the event that we're doing this against is if the input volume on input number 1 changes, call this control change. And so what this is doing is it's saying when the volume level changes inside of vMix, call this activator, and that will take that volume level that's happened, and it will translate that to a fader movement. And that's that last piece is the type. So this is the reciprocal action to the shortcut, which lets me take the slider and set it in vMix. This is taking the slider in vMix and setting it on the external controller. So with all of these done, we now have a mirrored framework for everything. So if you see here, we're covering the studio audio, the 6 REM guests, master volume, and bus A volume. So these are all the activators. So now, no matter where, let me get out of here. So no matter where I make a change, if I come over here, let's see if we can get the 2-shot up. So if I come here, if I make a change over here, you see that right away the controls are changing. But if I come over here, you'll see in vMix that I am now changing the slider over here by just doing this. So we've married these two now. So the shortcut is controlling and the vMix, and the activator is controlling the X-Touch. So with that all done, we now have all the core stuff that we need to just put this into a larger production. And this is really, really powerful as it is, just with the slider control. But you can, there's all these buttons on the X-Touch as an interface. So what we've done is we put together a basic type of production scenario where we're going to use the control surface here, the X-Touch control surface, to sort of control the entire production interface. Now, some of the limitations in this, by the way, is that you can't really turn lights on and off to signal different states right now with vMix alone. Something called Central Control will let you do this, and definitely a very cool product we will be covering later on another show. But right now, you can at least use all the buttons and work with that to make this thing operate a full show. So what we're going to be doing here in our vMix interface is we have a set of 6 remote guests, sort of your typical remote panel that you would have. So these are the inputs for the 6 guests. We have an operator or a host that will basically be on the show. And we have a 2-box shot. And this 2-box shot will allow you to take the host and any one of the individual guests and put them into that second box. And the way we're doing that is we're using a mix input. We're using mix input 2, mix 2 to control what we input into that second box. And we do this for a very specific reason is we actually want, when you select a guest inside this second box, one of the remote guests, we actually are using a Stream Deck. If you remember when we did the initial shot, we had a Stream Deck sitting here, which will show us which guest slot is actually now assigned to the 2 box. So if I were to do something where I have the host is, so let's do the host as a solo. So if the host is here and I wanted to just be able to take a glance which one of the guests I had sitting there, I can select any of these guests, and you will see now that I am controlling not just what's happening on screen, because you could see that the different guests, based on what was happening here, were all being swapped. But you can also see on the Stream Deck that it's giving me a red indicator for whichever guest channel is selected. One of the other things you'll notice I did is when I select one of these guests, so I'll just sort of do this far enough off to the side, I take their audio volume and I raise it automatically to 80%. And I take all the other guests and I lower it to 20%. So you could sort of still hear them. So if somebody wanted to interrupt and jump in, you could actually switch to them. But they basically keep any sort of noise that could be generated from those guests to a minimum down in the background. And this is all happening just by me switching through the different guests that I want. And if you look at how that looks, these are just what you see. You see the host and the guest. If there was another guest that started talking, I could just go and select them, and automatically the volume levels and the guest would be changed here. And so we're doing this through button pushes. So if you look across here, this bottom row of buttons, which is called select, we use those buttons to select which guest is part of the 2 box, or in the case of the operator video, to select the 2 box. We also have the option, there's another button right up here in this line called solo. And so if I just wanted to show the one guest or the host by themselves, when I press these buttons, that will just pop up the individual guests. So if I go here, you now see there's the host, there is guest 1, guest 2, guest 3, etc. So we're moving through. So now, in addition to doing that, I kept the other guests at 40%, because this could be a more conversational mode where the guests will be talking and you pop in to go to one or the other guest. So I kept them at a higher level, but every time I select a new guest to be there, sorry, I select the wrong one. So every time I select a new guest, you can see that the audio faders adjust accordingly, and that guest that's selected gets the higher volume level. So this is, again, all done leveraging shortcuts inside of vMix. So let me just go in and show a little bit more about how that would work. So in the shortcuts, we actually created a script. So this is the second piece. When we talked with Aziz before, one of the, on last week's show, we talked about, the difference between activators and scripts and how you could do more complex things. This is probably the simplest way to do more sophisticated things. It's that step between full-blown VB scripting and individual function shortcuts. So it's called dynamic scripts, and we have a start dynamic script function. But let me show you what's in this. So when I select one of these guests as a solo guest, what I'm doing is as part of the 2 box, what I'm doing is I'm selecting that input with, say, and it's something called an API function. It basically lets you call the shortcuts inside of vMix. API.function. I call set the active input to input number 2, which is the first guest. We have the host and the guest go up from there. And the other thing you'll notice is that I have this thing here, which we've never seen before in any of the scripting we've done, mix equals. And what this is telling it to do is it's telling it to take the mix, to set this as the active input on mix number 1. Now, one of these crazy things, this is one of the struggles sometimes with vMix, is they pick these number ranges. So inside of the scripting, mixes start at 0. So mix 0 is your standard main mix. Mix 1 is your mix that's, your mix 2, 3, and 4 that you have as additional mixes. It's how vMix does it. So mix 0, 1, 2, 3 are the 4 mixes you have inside of scripting. So that's why it says mix 1. But what's unique here is now we are telling it to go and make this change to a different mix than our main mix. And that's how we set that up with active input. And then all we're doing is we're setting the volume levels for all of these inputs accordingly. So we set for guest 1, since this is the first guest, we set that to 80 and everybody else jumps to 20%. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Now, the reason the sliders all adjusted was because when the set volume changed on input 1 or on any of these inputs, the system recognized that and triggered the activator, which changed the sliders now on the mixer. So very, very cool. Once this is set up, any change to that volume level, no matter how it's caused, it's not just me moving a slider, do anything programmatically, that's going to make that change be reflected over on the X-Touch. So very cool there. And that's all we've done. It's just simply sitting there calling a set of functions. So at its simplest, this dynamic scripting lets you take a set of individual shortcuts and bundle them together into a single action, a dynamic script. And that's what we did here. And we did the same thing for each one of the other guest inputs and for the host input. So that's all set. The almost identically to this, so let me sort of jump out of here, is we have this for the solos, and it's pretty much close to the same thing, where if I go in, I am doing it now where I do a merge, so I'm sort of merging in every one of the videos that I have. But this is coming in and it's just adjusting volume levels to 80% and 40%. So again, very, very similar, but these adjustments happen because I set the volume levels. So that's everything that's sort of packed in here. The other cool thing, though, is that there are other functions that we can have here. So things that we want to do where we, so let's see, so we have stuff that we did in here for lists too. So we wanted to show that you could do playlists. So the playlist stuff is standard vMix, but let me go in and sort of show you what this would look like if I go through the setup here. So on the controller over here, what I have now is I have a set of buttons that I've already mapped to do these types of controls here. And so if I go here, let's see if we can get this shot with both vMix and this in there. So if I come here, the first thing I can do is say, I actually want to put up a list and start playing from a list. So I have just a list of videos sitting here. So down here in input 10, there's a list of videos here. And I have this set up now where I can move through the list of videos just by touching here and move up. So all of this now is mapped here. So again, we're starting to see that this can be used for more than just the audio. Unfortunately, there's no lights or anything here, so I can't sort of reflect the action in some sort of feedback, but functionally, it all works here. One of the things, though, to keep in mind when you do all this is that you need, when you set this up to capture it as a key press, because this is a Midi controller, you want to tell it that the value on that Midi controller, not any activity, but the actual value of 127, which is the maximum loudness on a Midi key press, that's what you check. So let me finish this, but I just want to show that before we finish. So the other thing we did in here is we came back and said, well, say if I had a 2-box up, but people wanted to discuss this, so we just set another button up where now you can call up this little list of videos that play back, well, 2 people sitting there. Again, these are very standard production things. There's nothing magical about what we're doing. This is really just to show that you could take and run a fairly complex production with lots of different moving parts from this controller. And when you when we start to talk about this in the context of something like central control, you're going to see, because that can actually generate feedback into this and light things up and assign names to all the channels and things like that. So it becomes much more powerful. And that's why we wanted to start here with sort of in the raw vMix state, what you can do. But we'll do this again using central control in a future show. And I think you'll see just how much more powerful this as an interface can be. So that really covers the core of what we wanted to get to today. So let me go back. We may have a few more comments here. So let's see. So Bill is just saying he hopes we can get the Rodecaster Pro 2 sometime soon. That's something we definitely are going to try to do. We're going to write to them and see if we can get a loaner for a few weeks and definitely get that on the show. So Michael Quist said he didn't know that the X-Touch had motorized faders. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the capabilities of the X-Touch as a control surface, it's got a ton of different things in it that are really nice. And I mean, some of the really nice things on here is that if you look at the interface and all the different things, there are, like this you could use, if you can map it to, you could do panning, you could do gain control as well as volume control. All of these buttons can light up. You have individual like recordings. So if you needed to ISO chord, you could actually use the record buttons and sit there and say, okay, I can start ISO chords for different inputs that I have coming in. You have a Jog Shuttle. So while I haven't used this, this is something I think you could probably do for instant replay and use this as a way to sort of shuttle through video to mark in and out points that you want. And again, you have all of those types of things in here because there's a whole automation framework on this side for letting you sort of work through this. And this has a Jog Shuttle scrub button over there to let you switch between these. So very, very cool as an interface, and definitely something I think, you know, we could certainly get a lot of mileage out of in parallel with the Stream Deck. So, I mean, all we did with the Stream Deck is we were basically saying anytime something goes into the output of mix number one, you know, the second mix in vMix, just light up the corresponding, if this input is in it, light it up red. If it's not, then it just goes back to its default of black. So that's how we did that. So again, these activators become really powerful because once you set them, you stop worrying about what you're doing specifically, and that state information just gets transmitted all the time. So, so let's see. Michael Quist is asking, can you show a little more on how you change the guest in the mix input? Yes. So let me go back in here. So let me go over to shortcuts. And when I set the guest in the mix input, that's this right here. So what we're doing, and let me sort of highlight this, might be a little, this is the function that actually changes the guest inside the mix input. So I have a button press, which is basically the select button press on the channel. And when I press that, it's saying set the mix input for mix input 1, which again is the second mix input, to input 2, which is my first guest. And we're doing it as active input, which is the shortcut function. So that's going to allow you to set this. And this could be, you know, mix 0, 1, 2, and 3. So you could actually be doing things on multiple mixes. So if I had a 3 box up there, I could have the host, which would be mix 1, and, you know, the host, which would be one solid input, and then mix 2, 3, and 4, or sorry, mix 1, 2, and 3, which would be your 3 guests that you'd have in a multi-box. And I could pick which guest I wanted to go into which multi-box. So very flexible for how you can do that. Some of the things that you can't do, unfortunately, I was looking for a way to basically be able to use a dial to change the value inside of a dynamic input. Can't do that. That would have been really cool because I wanted to have the ability to basically say, I could just sort of dial through a set of inputs and use that. But I'm going to see what else we can do with that, because I think there may be something between scripting and dynamic inputs and shortcuts and activators that we can make some interesting stuff happen here. But that's just something that we saw as a limitation. But that's how you actually change it for each one of the guests. So hopefully that covers what you want. And the rest of this is just setting the volumes for all of the guest channels. So that's what we did there. So since we've covered everything, why don't we transition over to our post-show hangout. If you can't join us, thank you very much for being part of today's show. Hopefully you found it interesting. And we will be back next Friday with another Streaming Alchemy show. But hopefully we'll just see you in a few seconds on the post-show. Take care, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. So this is something that we've had sitting around for a long time. We actually got this unit originally because it's something we want to program our own product to work with, because we know that there's been a lot of interest for people that want to sort of control live to air using a physical control surface. We've added some stuff for that in the next release, but this was really part of our effort to cover that. So this is why we sort of had this sitting here, and we thought it would be a good thing. And also because last week Aziz, the videographer, I believe is his name, he actually was asking these questions and put in a super chat donation, which we were grateful for. So we figured let's try to cover this and make sure that, you know, if he is watching, you know, we answered some more of the questions he had. And we thought it was a generally cool topic because I think activators are not well understood inside of the vMix community. And the fact that they're independent from shortcuts, I think is something that needs to be emphasized, because we tend to really lay them together. When I press a button, I want the color of that button itself to change, that type of back and forth. But certainly, you know, there's a lot of power in just having it be an independent control for an external piece of hardware. And that's why, if you saw when I did the switching between the guests, I wasn't touching the Stream Deck. The Stream Deck in this example that we used today was just a light indicator. It could have been a set of bulbs that I had. You know, I would definitely love to see something which I could pick up programmatically from an activator. So externally, I could use that. So that's something I'm going to explore. But I think that would be very cool to say there is a software version of an activator where this information could get passed and used programmatically to do things potentially on other systems entirely. So something, you know, possibly very cool that we could do here. So that was where all this started. So let's see. Michael's saying the transmission to Facebook got interrupted. First time it speeded through the recording to catch up. So hopefully we're not having issues, but if we are, I do apologize. You know, things look okay from outside right now, but you know, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues somewhere in the chain going up, because, you know, we're going across multiple devices getting out to stream. So apologies for that, Michael. But Michael's saying that, you know, it is complex with activators because it's not always clear how to use them. And I think that resonates with me, because I understand exactly what you're saying, Michael, on that. The thing with activators at its foundational level is that it looks at events inside of vMix and triggers a response with an external piece of hardware. So that's all activators do. That response can be something where it's a programmable response, like on a Stream Deck where you can set a color to a button, that type of thing. So that's baked in. The other piece, it can be, there's a numerical value that's being sent. So that's the case with the X-Touch, where it's a slider, and you can say control the slider. So it's part of, you know, it's a complex set of things. And in vMix, it isn't very, very clear. And probably it's not the ideal UI for doing a lot of these things, because they are really separate, and, you know, between the shortcuts and the activators, even though a lot of them could be worked together. And you may want to turn around and say, when I execute certain things, these are potentially multiple activators that could be associated with that. You don't really have that ability in the vMix UI to make those types of more nuanced changes. The other thing with activators, especially with things like color, is you have a default and you have something you set it to. You can't turn around and say, if the state is, if the state is off air, set it to green. If the state is on air, set it to red. But if there's nobody in that output, set it to gray or to blue. Where you can't do that, and so you need to use things. I mean, now things like companion, things like central control, they will let you do those more nuanced things, which is why I definitely want to cover that. But that should help, with doing more complex things with activators and shortcuts. But I agree, Michael, it can be a tricky thing to get into. Getting the hardware to talk the way you expect it to isn't always straightforward. Like I said, needs different firmware, needed different control models and everything else. So there are a lot of gotchas in the process, but I don't think you're alone in this. This is something, I think vMix over time, hopefully these will be things they'll pay more attention to with future releases as well. So let's see. So Michael is saying he thinks it would be perfect to have the Stream Deck screen red whenever audio clips or etc. Yeah, I mean, again, this is some of the limitations inside of vMix. Your ability to take feeds from audio, like to display meters or other stuff, is fairly limited. So you don't really know if something's clipping. You could sort of do something if the level that you're set to is at a certain height, but you don't get feedback on dynamic level changes in the audio, other than you can say if it's above -10, if it's above 0. So you could sort of do something based on that. So definitely interesting. I could see if there's something we could do with that, and just post it to our Facebook page for people, so they can take a look at it. But that's a good example. I think those are the types of things where if you have when you think of activators as separate things, that's a perfect example of that. If I have that ability to look at these things and to flash a button red if some adverse event is happening, that would be great. Or something I need to pay attention to. That would be great. I mean, the other thing on the X-Touch is they actually have little LED meters next to each of the channels. There's no way to map the audio output levels to that. So I could display it on here as a true external mix. So you still need to sort of have the vMix mixer UI there as well to keep track of these things. So Nathan Bennett is saying, thanks for the information. So yeah, this is, there are no good single examples for a lot of these things because the hardware is different for all of these. But things on Stream Deck are fairly straightforward for button presses and lighting colors. That's also true for X keys controllers, where they have like the blue and the red and no lights. So I think all those things are covered pretty well inside of vMix. If you want to do more sophisticated things like central control or companion would be the way to go about that. And all those integrate very well with vMix as well. So I think if you were doing this for something that you want to do on AWS, if you had systems deployed in the cloud and you wanted to use physical controllers to do this, this would be a perfect way to do this with Stream Decks, with activators, and something, or central control, so you can get feedback from what's happening at a remote location. Those types of things are ideal. So, yep, there aren't a lot of simple examples. So hopefully, this helped a bit, because I tried to do a bit with the Stream Deck, a bit with the X keys, and this general vMix shortcuts as well. Combine these together with a simple production model that we were using with that. But since you mentioned this, let me actually jump over to show you something on the vMix interface for a second, because I mentioned it, but I wasn't very clear about it. So if I go into here, one of the things you'll notice is here when I say MIDI note on, I'm finding a button press. What I needed to do here is where it says value, I need to turn around and say trigger this at 127. And what this is saying is when I press that button down, it basically goes between 0 and 127 for that button push. But this actually is the key press that you're using. So when I hit that number, 127, the button down, it will trigger this, in this case, a shortcut. If I didn't have this box checked, what would happen is when I pressed the button down, it would trigger the shortcut. And when I released it, it would trigger the shortcut again. So because it's basically seeing the 127 and the 0 as two general events on this Midi note. And so it's going and looking at that and saying, okay, I got told to fire this again because when I release it, you get that second fire. But this means you can do things with this like push to talk. So I could push the button down and say, when I push the value down, it does something like with the on-off buttons they have, like if you go mute on-off or audio on-off. It would work that way, where it triggers it and turns it off or on, and then when I release it, it turns it the opposite way. So definitely things that you can do there. Or you could set one up to say when it's 127, do one thing, when it's 0, do another. So just the act of releasing that button can do a different type of action. So definitely cool stuff that you can do with this. So for instance, if I wanted to turn around and say, when I push the button down, I would like to be able to talk to that remote guest to tell them you're going on air. And when the button gets released, it switches them on air. You could do that in now sort of a single button push. Push it down, just say you're on air in 3. And then when I release it, they go on air. And so it gives you these type of dual functions, and they aren't always just push to talk. They can be these types of sequenced events where I push down for one thing, and when I release it, that thing happens, and I have some sort of setup in advance of that. So some pretty cool stuff for that. So so let's see. So let's see. Yeah, Michael was mentioning that, yeah, when you mix different controllers, it doesn't make things any easier. And that's true. It's just, I think if these things were easier to configure inside of vMix, it would make it, easier for everybody. But definitely something that it could be, pretty cool, but pretty confusing all at the same time. Just the ability to have multiple Stream Decks and, physical controllers like that. So let's see. So JP is saying, any suggestions to link two devices to the same shortcut panel, an A10 Mini and vMix on one X keys? So there are ways to do that, actually. Inside of your X keys, you can shoot off multiple commands with a single button push. So that's one of the capabilities that's inside of the X-Keys software, the Stream Deck software. Sorry, I'm saying X-Keys. The Stream Deck software itself. So I don't know with the X-Keys. I mean, it does have push down and push up. So potentially you could do something where push down triggers on one system and releasing it triggers on the other. And those are two separate. So you could potentially do something like that. You could also do something in scripting in vMix where you could turn around and when I push the button, it does something in vMix that is scripted. So it can fire off a script that could control a device, another device in your workflow. So that would be another way to do this. So scripting opens up a lot of possibilities, especially if you get out of vMix directly and do things like we talked about. We're going to talk more about Node.js in the future. So this would be something where you could write stuff where the Stream Deck is talking to Node.js, and Node.js then says, who do I want to trigger events to, and handles all that communication sort of as a backend. And, definitely there are some possibilities there. So there are ways to do it. There are ways to have vMix systems talk to each other, as through sort of web controls. So you can do things that way. So I really don't know enough about the A10 Mini, so I don't want to talk specifically to that because I'd be outside of my area of expertise there. But there's probably software interfaces that would allow you to do most of what you want. And, triggering it from vMix, multiple commands in a Stream Deck, or from, an X keys push up, push down as triggers. All possible ways to do this. So Bill, let's see, Bill Muir was talking about, let's see, he's talking about the Rodecaster Pro 2, and it says it has 2 USB connections for 2 devices. So you should be able to link to a vMix laptop and another connected to an ATEM. Yeah, I mean, the Bill's right. The Rodecaster Pro 2 is definitely a cool piece of kit. And, I do think there'll be a lot of things that we can do with it. Again, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not recommending anybody run out and buy it yet. But I think if I can get my hands on one, we'll definitely put it to its paces there. So Michael is saying in Companion Stream Deck, you can, using the 99 pages, one set to one Stream Deck, another to the other Stream Deck, but that's from inside vMix. Yeah, I mean, there's different things you can do with how all of these pages get set up. I think in Companion, you have a lot more flexibility to provide feedback than the activators give you. And, you also can do a lot more, like sequences of commands that you can fire off. So definitely, the Companion Stream Deck is a very solid combination. So definitely something, we haven't really talked much of Companion. It's probably something that, in addition to central control, something we should also look at, because I know a lot of people do use Companion. So definitely something we'll put on the plate for a future show. So let's see. So we have Aziz join us. Aziz, thank you for joining us. I actually mentioned at the beginning of the show that we were doing this based on some of the questions you asked about activators in vMix. And we were talking about different ways to do sequences of commands inside of single button pushes with sort of dynamic scripting. So, because you were so generous with us last week, we figured we wanted to give you something back by covering the 2 specific topics that we got to talk about. So thank you for joining us. That's great to see you here. So Bill is again talking about the Rodecaster Pro 2 has 9 faders and 64 buttons. So there's definitely a lot of potential control in all that. Definitely cool there. There's all I can say is we're looking forward to it. So let's see. So Aziz is talking about with Stream Deck and BitFocus, it's possible. Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, BitFocus is a very powerful free piece of software, and definitely something that we know is widely used with Stream Decks in the industry. So very, very powerful across the board for these things. And, I haven't really set anything up with, BitFocus Companion and the X-Touch, but I believe, we'd be able to do a lot more and show that. So again, a good future episode of Streaming Alchemy is there. So let's see. So Cloud Bedrock, it says, just bring me all the Stream Decks you have. Well, you never have enough Stream Decks. We've all come to that conclusion. I guess one of the cool things about this is once you move to moving from controlling the software directly to using physical control surfaces to control the software, it starts to make a lot of the things we talk about with cloud production much simpler. Yes, you do have the ability to go in and control any screen and all of that, but it's so much simpler if I want to adjust somebody's audio level for a vMix system that's running in AWS to simply move the slider. It's our natural reaction. And to give you a sense of the power here, we were doing some work on AWS 2 days ago, and the ping time between the round trip ping time was 1 millisecond between AWS and the studio we were working in. So, I mean, you're talking about near instantaneous feedback. So this isn't some really high latency control that you'd have to deal with where things are happening and you're, 2 frames behind. this is like almost real time. So very, very cool when you start to do that. And having these physical control surfaces is just so much easier, especially if you have dedicated positions. Somebody's focused on audio, somebody's focused on, the traditional TD role. You can set these up as separate stations, even though they're all controlling one vMix. The other thing you get to do, unlike a mouse, is that I could control multiple audio sliders at the same time. So if I were trying to lower a whole group of guests and raise another, you could do this like you would do it in a traditional recording studio. Just put your fingers on the sliders and move them, and that would all go in simultaneously, as opposed to the mouse where I'd have to sort of move, click, click, move, click, move, click, move, and it takes a lot longer. Much more physically connected with that. So definitely something that's really cool. So let's see. So Aziz, yeah, I mean, we wanted to cover, after we talked about it, we thought it was, a really good topic. And, we were really grateful for what you did last week. So we just wanted to make sure that, we all here recognized and appreciated that. And so we figured we'd cover the things that you were asking about. So thank you, Aziz. Let's see. So Michael is saying motorized faders on the RC2. Yes, I believe the faders are all motorized. I mean, Bill can pop in to confirm that, but I believe they are all motorized on the RC2. So definitely, technically a cool device on that front. And so JP is saying, trying to set up my capture device so I can switch all in one place. My ATEM feeds, my vMix. So have to switch on two devices. Yeah, I think this is something, especially with BitFocus or central control, you'd be able to do that with one button press will control multiple things. And I'm more familiar with central control than companion, but that's the BitFocus companion. So that's something I definitely want to play with. But you could work, with either of those to do these types of one button push controlling multiple devices and multiple functions on those devices. So let's see. So Aziz is saying our audio is not in sync on his side. So I apologize. I'm not sure why. I mean, we'll have to take a look and see if there's something drifting out on this side. But if anybody else sees that, just let us know, because I certainly would like to take a look at this after the show if we are having an issue. So let's see. So Michael is asking about, we talk about AWS. Do we have any experience using Azure? We don't really have much experience using Azure. AWS has been really convenient for us. Your ability to just sort of get instances on demand and have access to sort of a mature ecosystem for controlling things remotely. I'm not saying you can't do all of this in Azure. Google also has an online, a sort of a hosted environment that you can run from. So there are alternatives out there to AWS. I know I use AWS all the time, but it's the thing that I'm most familiar with and that I would be most comfortable recommending to somebody at this point. But, if other people have used Azure for this, definitely, chime in the comments so we could answer this, but I don't have any direct experience. So let's see. So Tom Eagle, Tom, how are you? Thanks for joining us here. He says he has a different topic. He says in YouTube, he sets up a scheduled live stream. At or after scheduled time, I start the vMix stream. I have to go to YouTube to go live. Is there an automatic way for YouTube to go live? I don't have an answer for that. So I'd have to look that up. We are using sort of a multi-distribution service. So when we feed, that's actually feeding YouTube and Facebook. So that happens automatically, but our YouTubes are not scheduled. So I haven't played much with that, but that's a good point. Let me look into that and see if I can find out a little more about that. Excuse me as I write this down. Okay. So sorry I don't have a better answer for you. So let's see. Aziz is asking, could you please talk about a talkback microphone to vMix callers? Yes, I can. I can do that. So let me give you an example of how that would work. Let me see if I can. Let's switch over to vMix, and we'll see if I can do this directly here. So, so the way I would do this is I would go in and I'd create a new shortcut, and let me see. What I'd want to do is I'd want to change the audio. I'd want to send the audio to bus A. So what I want to do is when I push a button down, I'd want to route that audio out to bus A. So I just, sorry if I don't have all the stuff off at the top of my head here. So yeah, so what I could do is I could turn around and I could set the channel, the volumes going to the different buses. I'm sorry if I'm doing this ad hoc. I have to remember exactly how this would go. Yeah, so I apologize. I just can't remember it off the top of my head, but it basically what you would be doing is on your Stream Deck, when you push the button down, you would say, I want to route this audio to bus A for my microphone. And then on the release of the button, because those are two separate key strokes, you set the shortcut to route it just to master. So it's, or to mute it going to bus A. So this would be sort of, if you wanted to do that direct talkback, you could do that. And that could go, bus A could then go to all of your remote guests. So your remote guest would hear bus A, which could be your return audio to them. And all you'd be doing is punching in the operator microphone into bus A. When you push the button down and you release it, it would shut it off. So sorry, I just couldn't do this off the top of my head here, but that's how you would basically do that. So it would be done with the Stream Deck as the trigger on, trigger off, or your X keys trigger on, trigger off when you push the button and release it. But that's how you would basically handle that. Now I'll find out the exact setup. I'm sorry, just doing it spontaneously. So my old brain doesn't always remember everything, so I apologize for that. So Michael is saying that he's also seeing the audio a little bit out of sync on Facebook. So good to know. So thank you, Michael. If anybody's seen it out of sync on Facebook, let me know. So if I know whether it's just on YouTube, let me know, because if it's just Facebook, that's one place to look. If it's both, that's another thing. So let's see. Are you going to do? Bill Mew is saying, are you going to do a demo on how to set up vMix on AWS? That's something we were thinking of doing. We were thinking of having sort of an AWS show to show you how to create the instances and set up and control vMix on AWS. We'd probably want to have central control be the control mechanism for that. So we have a few moving parts that we want to put together and get in place before we do that, but definitely on our list of shows to do in this season. So thank you, Bill. So let's see. Yeah, so Aziz is saying add a new audio device in vMix, then send that bus to bus A to callers. Yeah, I mean that's the way you do it. So you have what you have inside of vMix is you have your in your audio outputs here, you have all the different buses, and you can route different types of devices into that. So DVS or actual physical devices that you want, out of it. So this bus would be that sort of audio device. You can also just have them enabled and route them internally to say which outputs do I want different audio to go to. So in your settings for your mixes, let me go over here, if I go to outputs, in your mixes over here, you can turn around and say, what audio channels do I want to go out a specific mix? So normally the way you would do this is you would come back and say, I want, well, this, let me get out of here. So we cancel this. What I'd want to do is say, I'm going to use output number 2 as my return audio to my guest. You would go in and you set that audio to bus A, and then anything that you want the remote guest to hear that you don't want the audience to hear, you would route that through bus A. And that's where you would punch in your microphone to go in and talk to the remote guest. So that would be something you could, just change these settings down here. And again, I'm just sorry I didn't remember it off the top of my head, but that's basically the model you'd use. So using the different buses as different feedbacks. And you could use it to, so say you had 4 or 5 guests, you could use the individual audio buses, one to each guest, and just punch in where you wanted to have those sent. So that would be, so you could add this as a new audio device. You can add it as an input. So you could add the audio device. So like in this case, we have let me pull this over here. We have this sort of MV7 Shure going in as a USB device. And that's, so inside of vMix, that's the studio audio we have here. So any audio coming in there, that could just be an operator headset. So you could do the same thing where I use that as a headset I'd have. And for the operator, you'll have that thing jump in to bus A when they need to talk to the guest. So definitely something you can do there. So let's see. So, yeah, okay. So Michael is saying you're doing well. The explanation is correct. So, thank you, Michael. I'm sorry if the old brain doesn't always work as fast as I'd like it to. And we have a second vote on a show on AWS, so Michael as well. So that's good. We did mention, so Michael, thank you. The callers can be on different buses, so you can send different audio to each one of the different callers if you'd like, and that's something you can do. So Bill is saying then the top of the list for the season is vMix on AWS and the Rodecaster Pro 2. So yep. So hopefully we can get Rode to send us a demo unit. I'm guessing they're probably in short supply right now because they were just released, but hopefully they'll be able to get us one, over the next couple of weeks, and we'll definitely do a show on that. So Aziz is saying he's got it. So good. Hopefully that was enough. I'll look this up myself after because it's something I've done, which is even more embarrassing when you do something you can't remember it yourself, but it does happen. So, all right. So hopefully we've covered everything. So this is sort of last call for questions. We're about 20 seconds behind you. So I'll just talk to give you time to get any questions in. So, okay, Michael is just saying how to really use central control together with AWS. Yeah, so there's a lot of people that are using that exact combination where they have Stream Decks, different types of control surfaces, and central control driving systems on AWS for a lot of stuff. So we will definitely cover all of that. And Aziz is saying, let's see, please let me know if you guys ever visit Berlin. I'd invite you guys for the best kebab. Aziz, you have absolutely. I love kebab. So it would definitely be great to get to meet in person. And the kebab would be a plus. Thank you, Aziz. So he's saying, thanks for the great show. We appreciate that, Aziz. So as always, everybody that spends time with us here, we're very grateful for that. And so Michael is saying that he's 100% newbie on that combo. So that's, this is something that's really just starting to come to the fore. And there are a lot of reasons, both technical and commercial, sort of the economic scale on this, that make that attractive for certain types of production. So I mean, if you are going to do 10 productions a year where you need massive compute power, it probably isn't worth it to invest in physical hardware. Whereas you can spin up an Amazon instance, run it for a few days to set up and run each production. And, that could economically be much less expensive. Technically, you're also getting phenomenal internet connectivity. So, if you set up virtual private cloud on AWS, based on the instances you're using, you can get 25 gig or 40 gig connections between the systems. So like moving NDI around, that's a blip. You're not even really seeing, a lot of load. So there are good technical and good economic reasons. It's just, it has to make sense for what you're trying to do, for it to be a fit. So JP is saying, thank you, and he appreciates you and the team on a Friday night. So JP, we very sincerely appreciate everybody that makes the time. So, and I'm saying that on behalf of everybody here on the team, Joe and Matt, who both do a phenomenal job running this each week. So very, very grateful. So Bill is asking, can you move a vMix license from your PC to an instance on AWS? Yes, you can. And you can move your vMix licenses, and they don't have a restriction on the number of times you move it, which some software does. So you do have to be careful with that. But you can move it, and you are allowed for a given license to have 2 installed instances, not to be used together, but 2 installed instances. So if you wanted to keep one that you would use for AWS and one you used, physically for the studio, that's another alternative for putting that together. So let's see. So Michael's saying, so AWS would be much more effective with lots of guest callers together with NDI. How about sending camera inputs via AWS? So normally for camera inputs, we'd recommend using something like SRT, which is Secure Reliable Transport. So slightly higher latency. So you're probably talking, about, 150 milliseconds that you'd probably have for something like that, maybe a little more if your connection wasn't great. But that gives you a way to get a clean camera signal into your production space. But it could also be used for getting a feed back to the remote location. So let me just pull something over here. I'll just unplug it since it's not really being used. There are little devices like this that they have let me try to get this back in focus here, ins and outs on it, which have SRT built in. So you could actually plug something like this into your remote studio or your venue that you want to pull a camera feed from, plug the camera into this, and this would send that camera video SRT up. Its SRT isn't video specific, so you can sort of wrap anything. You can wrap audio, you can wrap video in that, different things you can do. So the other thing though is you can use these same things which will take SRT and convert it to an HDMI out. So you could have a reference monitor there. So if you want to send video back from your production with maybe a video from the director going back to the remote location to control things, you can do that. So very, very sophisticated setups that you can now do in this distributed way. And especially if you have multiple people working on a production, not having them all have to come to the same physical location can be really a big benefit economically and in terms of availability. I mean, turning around and saying, can I get somebody to travel 3 hours there and back to a venue for a Friday night show? Maybe not. Can I get somebody to drop in for 3 hours on a Friday night to run a show remotely? Your chances are better. So that, in terms of getting people and the staffing for crews, that definitely advantages there as well. So, the other piece to this question was, would it be more effective for use with lots of guest calls together? Your internet connectivity up at AWS is going to be great. I'm just sort of across the board. They're right there on the sort of the big central cluster points inside the internet. So they get the best connectivity you're going to get. So it would definitely, make that, a much better connection for everybody, especially with lots of callers where you could have between callers and cameras and other video that you're going to be sending in and out, because for each caller you're sending video back. So these types of things where you have a lot of uplink video, AWS definitely has a lot of advantages there. So no, so let's see. Yeah, so JP was talking to Bill about you can remove the license and change it over to AWS. So yeah, you definitely can do all of that. And Michael was saying BirdDog has the SRT. Yes, they do. In their latest firmware upgrade, it's their, I forget they call it sort of their Gen 2 or Silicon 2, I think is the name they use for it. They now added SRT into that as well. So that's a part of that. So it's not just kilovolt. So definitely very cool for that. So yeah, and to Bill's point, he was asking, you can shift to the cloud. Yes, that is, you are able to shift licenses to the cloud. And that is something that actually AWS also has a whole set of directions on setting up vMix on the cloud directly. So if you go onto the AWS site, you could look up vMix AWS and they'll have their own recommendations for, using Parsec, or I think they use Teradici as their default remote screen manager. So all that stuff is there as well. So definitely allowed. So JP was asking about what brand and device, and does it have an HDMI input? So this right now it's the BirdDog Flex. I'm sorry, I'll try to get this in focus and pull me out. So it has it's PoE device. You can actually do, and this is the input, so this would be an HDMI in. So you take an HDMI from a camera in, and it would let you put NDI or SRT out over the network. And it also has a little headset for comms. So if you wanted to do a comm system, BirdDog also has cloud-based comm software that lets you talk to all these. So this is a flex in, they have a flex out, which is how you take SRT and feed that to a monitor. So both of these very, very small. They have ones that mount on cameras. So, sort of, it's got a little screw base on the bottom. You could set that into a camera. So very convenient for those types of things. So let's see. So Mike was asking, and you can rent vMix licenses also from their website? Yes. So they have vMix Max, which is a vMix Pro license, $50 for a month, I believe, is what they charge for that. So that would give you everything inside of Pro that you can then use, so if you have an event for AWS, and for $50, that's a line item you could roll into whatever it is that you're going to be, billing a client for. And so it becomes very clear, that if you're using that, it's specifically for that event, and, then you're not worried about the license regarding your own licenses. So good point, Michael. That is another very good way to do it. So let's see. So Bill is saying, can't wait for the vMix on AWS demo. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be fun. And we're looking forward to doing that as well. So Michael is saying, be careful with the comm. Just had a conversation today with their supplier. It's using NDI for audio and not stable. Yeah, I really haven't used their comm. I'll be honest, haven't used their comms. But I do know that, in terms of the other capabilities, people have had a lot of luck with that. So JP said the audio is breaking up. So I'm sorry about that, JP. Well, we'll take a look at audio again today. So we have a few new things in the chain, but we'll definitely take a look at that. So he's saying the audio is breaking up. And yes, we're talking about a BirdDog Flex. So they have Flex in, Flex out. And, definitely, I think they just raised the price. It used to be $399 US. Now they're like $429. But they're, based on what you need, they are 4K. So that is definitely a plus. And, the thing with 4K to keep in mind is that if you're using something external, you could combine 4 1080 camera feeds into a single 4K feed and then break it up on the other side into individual 1080 feeds. So definitely, things you can do with that 4K. So NDI4 audio can max out a network. Yeah, I mean NDI5 is much more mature overall. So I definitely agree. Uh, anything you could do, anything you're going to do with NDI, I would recommend. You know the 5 tools, having 5. If like now vMix is NDI5, Later went to NDI5. So most of the applications out there are also that have NDI are going to be NDI5. So much better all around. Uh, so, so Michael is saying there's no breakup audio on his Facebook. So, okay, I'm not sure then what's going on, but I apologize for anybody that is having trouble. So hopefully it's not something on this side, but if it is, we'll definitely take a look. So, all right then. I think this is probably a good place to wrap. So, as always, I appreciate this. This is a great conversation. I enjoy the post-show hangout as much as I enjoy doing the shows. So this is great. So thank you everybody for hanging out for probably over half an hour now. So take care. We'll see you all next week. Thanks again.